pretty sure it's recording. Okay. So, is this not working? All right, so this is going to be about the evolution of seed plants. So our concepts, we have seeds and pollen grains and their key adaptations for life on land, gymnosperms and their naked seeds on cones, reproductive adaptations for angiosperms, including flowers and fruits, and then human welfare depending on seed plants. And there's your pages for where those are in the book. So quick overview: the gametophyte dominant, or your moss, your algae, and your other bryophytes, or your non-vasculars, and your sporophyte depend on your gametophyte for the nutrients. And then for sporophyte dominance, you have your gymnosperms and your angiosperms, or your vascular plants. They rely on photosynthesis for their nutrients, and the gametophyte depends on surrounding sporophyte tissues. And then here's your chart for, so your gymnosperms, your angiosperms being seed plant dominant, sporophyte dominant, so on and so forth. So seed plants are unique because they retain the ovary in the parent sporophyte. And so you have your integument, I guess, your sporophyte tissue that envelopes the megasporangium, and your megasporangium houses your megaspore, and your megaspore is, when that's fertilized, that's what will become your female gametophyte, and you have a little micropyle that's the opening for the pollen grain to get in. And your pollen grain is your microspore that develops into the male gametophyte, and it's enclosed within a pollen wall. And sporopollen, located within your pollen wall, and that protects the pollen grain while it's moving via wind or animal, so it doesn't get, it's not destroyed. So your pollination, when the pollen grain enters the ovule through the micropyle, the megaspore develops to your female gametophyte, and then that will produce an egg. And your pollen grain will develop a pollen tube that's going to release the sperm and fertilize your egg, and then your ovule is going to become a seed. So you have your integument. This is your seed coat, but it's your integument, and then you have your little micropyle and your pollen grain. Your megasporidium is the lighter brown in the middle, and your megaspore is the little thing that looks like an avocado. And then when your pollen grain comes in, your integument is going to close, and then there's your little pollen tube, and you have your female gametophyte and your little egg nucleus, and then once that's fertilized, this is your seed. So you have your seed coat, the spore wall, here's your embryo, and then that's your seed's food supply for nutrients and things. So, plants such as ferns have to rely on water to be able to get their flagellated sperm to fertilize eggs, but most gymnosperms and all angiosperms do not have flagella due to the fact that pollen grain can transfer via wind or animal, and this is highly contributed to why they can colonize dry habits. They're not dependent on water to fertilize. So before seeds, spores were the main way that plants such as moss, algae, and ferns managed to spread across the earth for the first 100 million years of plant life. They could lie dormant despite temperature, and then when conditions were right, they could germinate, like from the first chapter of this part. Spores are typically single-celled and have short lifespans and cannot store their own food, whereas seeds are basically the opposite. They are multi-celled, have longer lifespans, and can travel farther than spores, and if it germinates, it has a stored food that it can be provided with for support for growth. So your three key adaptations are your miniaturization of gametophytes, your airborne pollen to bring gametes together, and resistant dispersible seeds. So you have your naked seeds. So your sporangia is located on the scale-like structure of your cone. So you have your female cone and your male cone, basically, for simplicity's sake. Your sporangia are going to be located like down at the bottom of these scale-type structures. Conifers are heterosporous, so they have the two different kinds of spores in the two different cones. So like I said, your male and your female. Your pollen cones are your microsporocytes, and they will develop the haploid microspores, and those are your pollen grains. And then the ovulate cones, your megasporocytes, haploid megaspores inside the ovule, and then those are your female gametophytes. And so in conifers, pollen is going to be released in large amounts and carried by wind to other cones from your male, or your top one, your pollen cone, and those will carry via wind to your ovulate cone, and it can take about 3 years for the whole process to kind of mature seeds, and they will form, and then once your seeds are formed, then the scales are going to kind of separate, and then they'll go into the wind and disperse. So origins of characteristics seen in pines and other seed-bearing plants can be traced back as far as the late Devonian period, so 380 million years ago. Fossils from this time show that some plants acquired features in present seed plants, so megaspores and microspores. Your first seed plants in fossil records were seen about 360 million years ago, and it's unknown which lineage gave rise to gymnosperms. Your earliest fossils of extinct gymnosperm were 305 million years ago. They lived in moist carboniferous ecosystems dominated by other seedless vascular plants, and as the climate changed over time, becoming drier, gymnosperms were able to start dominating. So gymnosperms dominate the terrestrial ecosystem. They were the food supply for herbivorous dinosaurs, and they were pollinated by insects more than 100 million years ago, which is the earliest evidence of insect pollination in any plant group. And by the late Mesozoic era, angiosperms started replacing gymnosperms in some of the ecosystems. So your gymnosperms are still a really important part of the planet. The northern latitude is covered in a lot of forests, or your mostly conifers. And of the 10 plant phyla, 4 of them are gymnosperms. So you have your Cycadophyta. These are characterized by the large cones and the palm-like leaves. They have flagellated sperms, indicating descent from seedless vascular groups. They also thrived in the Mesozoic era. They're the most endangered of all plant groups due to habitat destruction and other human actions. Your second is your Ginkgophyta. These also have the flagellated sperms. There's only one surviving species, the biloba, and you can see them through you can tell that they're the ones with the deciduous fan-like leaves, and they turn gold in the autumn. And they tolerate air pollution really well, and landscapers, if they plant them, they tend to only plant the pollen producers because the seeds smell really nasty. And then you have your Genophyta, not sure. There's 3 different genera, and they can be found anywhere from the desert, while some are found in tropics. And even though they all look very different, they're grouped together because of their molecular data. And then you have your conifers. They're the largest phyla with 600 species. They're found in the northern forests and the southern hemisphere. Most species have woody cones, while others have fleshy cones, and most of them are evergreens. Okay, now on to angiosperms. So you have your key adaptations, flowers and your fruit. So your flowers are specialized for sexual reproduction, the pollen transfer via insects or animals or wind in your dense populations. Or you have your fruit, So seeds develop after fertilization and the ovary matures into a fruit. You can have your fleshy fruit or your dry fruit. So fleshy like tomatoes or dry like beans. And they protect and aid seeds in their dispersal. So you have your 4 modified leaves of flowers. You have your sepal. It's the green petals at the base. Then they enclose the flower before it opens. You have your petals, which are brightly colored, and they will attract all the different insects. Your stamen produce microspores, and they develop into the pollen grains containing your males. Your anther, where your pollen is produced. And you have a filament, which is just your stalk attached to your anther. You have your carpel, and that makes your megaspores and their products. The stigma is the sticky top that catches the pollen as it's moving through. And you have a style that leads from the stigma to the base of the carpel, where your ovary is located, and your ovary contains 1 or more ovules. And if that's fertilized, then your ovule is going to develop into a seed or a fruit. And your receptacle is like at the very bottom. So, excuse me. So there's complete and incomplete flowers. So complete is going to have everything that I just listed. And you have an incomplete flower or imperfect, which it basically is just missing your anther and filament. And that's the diversity results from the adaptations to specific pollinators. So like if you have your bees coming or other insects that are just bringing it from other flowers, then they don't really need it. So you have your fruits. Your seeds will develop after fertilization, and the ovary matures into a fruit. So you have your fleshy, so like tomatoes or nectarines or grapefruits, or you have your dry, so like cereal grains, rice, wheat, hazelnut. This is milkweed. So like here's your milkweed flowers, and then when they turn into seeds, the seed will like burst open, and then, or your case will burst open, and then these are all the seeds that will be carried through the wind, and then they will disperse that way. You can be dispersed through wind. So the wind will catch it and carry it, and then it'll land wherever it'll land. Or you can attach to animals like birds do, and then wherever they get dropped, they'll try to grow there, or poop. So eat the seed. The seed will last through being broken down through your body system, and then you poop it out, and it'll hang out there and try to grow. So pollination, you have your male gametophyte. It has 2 haploid cells. So one is generative, and it will produce your sperm, and the other one produces a tube. And then your female is just your embryo sac. So boiled down into 3 steps, your pollen will attach to your stigma, and the tube will travel down the style to your ovum, and it will discharge 2 sperm into the embryo sac through your micropyle. 1 sperm will fertilize your egg and make a diploid zygote, and then the other sperm fuses with 2 nuclei in the central cell, and that will make a triploid cell. That's like that's your double fertilization. And then you have an ovule that will mature into a seed, and the zygote develops into a sporophyte embryo with 1 or 2 seed leaves called cotyledons. And your triploid cell will develop into an endosperm, which will, it has its nutrients for the developing embryo. Huh?
What is cotyledon?
Cotyledon? Cotyledon. So, oh. There, okay. So, let's see. You have your pollen coming, and it attaches to your stigma. And so if it stays there, your pollen tube's going to come down, and it goes down to one of your ovaries. and then the ovary is gonna, you have your pollen, your sperm, and then the egg, and then the two, so one's gonna make your zygote and the other one's just gonna make all your nutrients, and then that way you have both for your seed dispersal, and it makes for successful, hopefully, when the seed travels, and then it can have its own nutrients when it grows until it can sustain its own life. But that looks a little more overwhelming, but
So,
it's,
let's go back to that for just a
yeah, it's really overwhelming to look
Okay.
at, but,
So, if you notice there's like two circles, right?
mhm.
Now, at the very top, and my eyes are not too good with the glasses that I have on, what does it say on the top little square, yellow square? On the, right where the, very inside this, the bigger circle. Is that meiosis or mitosis?
It says meiosis.
And the one right below that, and the next inner circle,
That says meiosis,
meiosis and meiosis both.
yeah.
So then, when we look at this, we have meiosis taking place. Remember where meiosis is? I'll let you finish and we'll go back to this, but think about what meiosis versus mitosis does. Go ahead, I won't interrupt you.
Meiosis is your gametes.
We'll-
We'll go back, okay.
As it is, once you figure it out.
So Darwin called it an abominable mystery because he was perplexed by the sudden geographic widespread appearance in the fossil records, and we still don't exactly know where angiosperms originated from. It was thought to have originated about 140 million years ago in the Cretaceous period. By about 100 million years ago, angiosperms began to dominate terrestrial ecosystems. The period ended with a mass extinction, increasing in the diversity and importance of angiosperms. They may have originated in the Jurassic. Pollen grains common in rocks from the Jurassic, so about 200 to 145 million years ago. There's no similar characteristics. Distinctive angiosperm features appear about 130 million year old pollen grains. So there were no signs of pollen grains, and then there were signs of pollen grains. So they think it might have been right around in that area that they originated. And then there's more than 250,000 living species of angiosperms, so they're about 90% of the plant species. You have your monocots and you have your eudicots or your true dicots. So they used to have them in just these two categories, but when they called them just dicots, they kind of realized that it wasn't going to work like that because they could have broken up into different lineages. So they have one of them's called the basal angiosperms, and those appear to belong to the oldest lineages. And then there's a fourth called magnolids, and they evolved later, but so your monocots and your true dicots have small variations between the two of them. So this is supposed to help with keeping them straight. What did you say they were called? How do you pronounce it?
Cotyledon.
Cotyledones. So dicots have two cotyledons. So, and then the monocots have one. And then monocots have parallel lines. So this one, like, each thing starts with an M to keep you remember monocot. So parallel veins, they march in a line. Or your vascular bundles are scattered, so it says we get a little messy. With your dicots, you have netted veins, so we are divergent. They split rather than go in a parallel line. Taproots and petals for monocots they go in threes, but for dicots they go in fours. So coming back, like this one has three, so there's three larger ones and then just three little ones on the bottom, and this one just has or different petals, but it's just not in three groups. They usually have four or so. But human welfare, depending on seed plants. So they are key sources of food and fuel and medicine. Most of our food come from angiosperms, so maize, rice, wheat, potatoes, sweet potatoes, all yield about 80% of the calories consumed by humans. They feed our livestock, so 5 to 7 kilograms of grain will produce 1 kilogram of grain-fed beef. And flowering plants provide edible product, so tea leaves, coffee beans, cocoa. Spices are derived from various plant parts. Flowers produce vanilla, black pepper, mustard. Your leaves produce basil, mint, and sage, and bark will give us cinnamon. So we rely highly on that. Primary source of fuel for much of the world, and wood pulp from conifers will make our paper. For centuries, humans have depended on seed plants for medicines or herbal remedies. Scientists have extracted medicinally active compounds from many plants and synthesized them for medications, so like willow leaves and bark used in pain relieving remedies. In the U.S., about 25% of prescription drugs contain an active ingredient from plants, usually seed plants. And while we can grow new plants and everything, like plant diversity is not a renewable source. Exploding population leads to the demand for space and resources, which threaten the plant species all over the globe, especially in the tropics, where 2/3 of the human population live, and that's where population is growing the fastest. About 14 million acres of the tropical rainforest are cut down each year, and it could be gone in roughly 200 years if that pace keeps up. The loss of the forest results in reduced absorption of CO2 that occurs in photosynthesis, potentially contributing to the climate change. As forests and plant species disappear, so do the insects and the forest animals. And if that continues at the current rate, 50% or more of the Earth's species will become extinct within the next few centuries, which will result in a global mass extinction. And we've only explored a tiny fraction of the 290,000 plant species known to exist. Only 5,000 have been studied as potential sources of medicine, and plants that could be of aid could be gone before we even knew they existed. So we really depend on plant or seed plants for food, fuel, and medicine. There's all the threats. And it's just a review. I won't play that, but it's a good review of everything. So go back to. Do you want me to go back to the pollination slide?
Yeah, we'll go back.